Again, for those of you who've joined, we're excited to share with you some of the highlights from the report that we recently released, I think it was last week or the week before, related to documenting the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the data set that we have at the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide. We feel like this is important insight to share with and socialize with the greater industry. This is the first of 2 webinars we'll have to discuss the report and really feature some highlights from the report. This one is in English, obviously, and we will have a second webinar at the same time next week in Spanish, hopefully able to reach many of our coffee producing partners in the countries where coffee is grown. It's really important that we're able to look at the data that we have at the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide to sort of substantiate and confirm some of the things that we heard and understood were happening as a result of the pandemic throughout the last year. I think early on we heard a lot about producers, for example, who had good customers lined up to pay really good prices for specially processed coffees or other things. And then those markets kind of went away as a result of some of the effects of the pandemic. And so those producers were left having made investments, but not able to then secure a buyer that would support those investments. And we heard a lot from roasters about how they were feeling and seeing a shift in the ways that their sales channels were performing. Obviously, in the retail sector, we lost a lot of momentum and a lot of opportunity to sell coffee and engage our guests. And that was that is an effect felt throughout the entire value stream. And so what we do here in this report is really look through some of the highlights that we were able to pull out of the data and some of the tendencies that we saw in shifts within that data, and talk about a little bit what they mean. And so my colleague Peter W. Roberts will walk through for the next 15 minutes or so the highlights from the report. There is a report to download. The link, I don't know if it's there in the chat yet or not, but there will be one, so that you can download the report at some point. So Peter will talk to you for the first 15-20 minutes or so, and then myself and 2 panelists who joined us as a part of our focus group conversations to really speak with practitioners in the industry about their own experiences and how we would be interpreting the data. We'll talk pretty informally about the data and the things that we've seen and experienced in our own world. So with that, Peter, I will pass it off to you.
All right, and thanks, Chad. Thanks for all of you for being part of this. I intend to be fairly academic when I run through this thing, very descriptive in terms of some of the observations that came out of the data, just to make sure that we all have a solid foundation. I think it's really signaling that the important part of work like this is not necessarily what the numbers say, but the conversations that the numbers stimulate. And so we hope that some of these observations get into circulation and that they end up pushing the sector forward. So if I have to manage my own, just some of this stuff will be a little bit like preaching to a choir, but there was an inordinate amount of worry during the first year of the COVID pandemic. Some of our focus group participants put it fairly nicely. This not like it's the first time that producers have ever faced consternation and worry, and it's not like some of the previous worries have gone away, but this is kind of another big thing in a long line of big things. One of the themes that will come up over and over again is the difference between what happened at the more regular part of the specialty market versus the fancier part, and an awful lot of consternation over what happens to sort of those 84 plus coffees for both the folks that want to sell them in consuming countries, but also the folks that want to produce them and get some of those higher prices. So, a context of worry and fear. We realized we've been working the Transaction Guide project since about 2018. We have a growing group of very passionate and committed data donors. It's up to about 81. The 2020 transaction guide, it's getting pretty serious. Data on 51,000 contracts covering about $2.1 billion worth of coffee. But we realize that we have a service to offer with the data because we have year-over-year data. And if we can pull those 58 data donors that provided information in the pre-COVID harvest year and in the next year, then we can do a good job putting out some observations about what did and did not happen, in the world of specialty coffee. In this spirit, the first thing to note, it was on everybody's mind, did the specialty coffee sector crater? And the answer is no. There was an awful lot of concerns heading into the pandemic about a very, very bleak year. But if you look at the overall numbers, and again, this is a consistent and comparable group of data, we did have contraction where we had the value of coffee fell by about 2%, volumes fell by less than 1%. And these are not draconian numbers. Now they do indicate there was a curtailing of the growth of the sector, but these overall numbers, right, were not nearly as problematic as people might have thought, heading into the pandemic. Having said that, extremely important to note that there was a very, very non-trivial composition shift, right, of specialty coffee. So that sort of roughly balanced slight decline overall masks a very, very staunch contraction in what we refer to as the fancier part of the market. So those coffees that are cupped 84 and above and are sold in lots that are kind of less than container, and a very, very dramatic expansion, right, of what we call the regular part of the market. And these are sort of the 80, 81, 82, 83 coffees that are typically sold in containers and above. This composition shift is an extremely important development. And a lot of our focus group participants are very, very interested and or concerned about whether this is something that's like up in the road and we'll get back to normal, or whether this is something that might signal kind of a longer term shift. But we think this is really important. In addition to concerns about volumes, everybody in the world of specialty coffee, especially on the green side, worries what happened to prices. First observation when you go through and just look at the overall quote unquote naked distributions is it actually looks like the pre-COVID year and the COVID year were pretty similar. If you adjust the FOB numbers and to make sure that they account for sort of differences in quantity and quality, you actually saw an increase in sort of adjusted FOB prices. And so that was something that was not as negative as people expected. Whenever producers feel that there's a shock to the system, there's this concern that says it will end up in lower prices. We do want to point out though, and we were very careful throughout the report to look at what was happening in the world of commodity, coffee, and in the world of commercial differentials, is the kind of adjusted price increases that we saw kind of in the two specialty sectors were not necessarily as enthusiastic or as positive as kind of what we saw in the commercial market. And that's something I think that's worth thinking about and worth talking about. As we shared general pricing observations with our focus group participants, they did a very nice job of reminding us that, that it wasn't just a direct COVID to FOB relationship, but there was a lot of other things going on. It came up over and over again. Have a look at what those differentials were doing in different countries, and especially if contracts were kind of on commodity prices. There was a dramatic movement, right, on the commercial differentials that would influence some of the conversations for specialty coffee. Another thing that comes up over and over again is there were, in some major coffee producing countries, there were non-trivial changes in the exchange rates that people dealt with. Now, in some cases, like in Brazil, exchange rate movements were a bit of a salve because you didn't necessarily have awesome FOB price movements in US dollars per pound, but exchange rate movements basically kind of like help folks out when we converted those prices into local currencies. So we'll want to make sure that as people continue talking about what's happening to on the pricing side of specialty, that we're sort of tracking all of the variables that matter. The other thing that comes up over and over again is, we talk about a global pandemic and we talk about a global specialty coffee market, but different things happen in different countries. And so we break down in the report, we try to look at our two sort of major regions that we have coverage on, and that's Central and South America. But our focus group participants pushed us even further and say, you know, there are certain things that are going on in Brazil that are very, very different than the things that are going on in Nicaragua, you know, for example. And this chart just gives a little bit of a taste of how different countries experience these regular versus fancy segment shocks, you know, differently. And it's really, really important as we think about programming to recognize that there were, you know, very significant country-to-country differences on the production side, and also different, you know, different patterns when it comes to the consuming regions. And Michelle, our colleague from Rainforest Alliance, you know, pointed out that if we are sort of talking about sort of a shift from the fancy to regular and more, you know, supermarket / grocery store sales, then we have to understand, right, that the pre-COVID pattern of how specialty coffees are sold and in what volumes differ between Europe and North America and Australia, New Zealand. And there are different patterns when it comes to volume shifts and it comes to prices as well. So again, more to think about in the report and more differences that were definitely kind of by our focus group members. A couple of other things that we wanted to look at. This is kind of like what moves and at what prices. The other related question is how things move. Conversation in the world, especially about like what should be the logic or basis for pricing, right? Is commodity plus differentials the way you want to go, or do you want to sort of think kind of more fixed pricing, kind of on a somewhat more longer term basis? The data definitely reveal a compositional shift above and beyond the clear observation that we do tend to see more differential pricing in the regular part of the market. But even within those regular the composition of fixed versus differential contracts shift, and it didn't shift towards fixed base pricing; it shifted towards differential pricing. So something to consider. And there are some thoughts about whether or not this is sort of a fairly benign development, or whether it's actually a very significant development when we think about the future of specialty coffee. The final thing that we picked up on is everybody is very aware of, and we're even more aware of after the data brief that we put out about 3 or 4 months ago, is that certifications and, you know, fair trade, organic, Rainforest Alliance, et cetera, a very, very important part of the market, especially in that regular, you know, piece. And there were some concerns expressed. If you sort of think about, well, if C price is moving in the right directions and differentials are high, and it's really hard, right, to go through and make sure you do all the work and the documentation associated with certifications in a COVID environment, that it's possible that, you know, that the certification side of the business would take a hit. We actually saw the other way around. So as we sort of saw that expansion kind of on the regular side of the market, we also kind of saw kind of a relative growth in the application of the major certifications. And many of our focus group participants saw that as a very important and positive development, because it speaks to the underlying resilience of the certification movement. So that's something that's in there to look at and in there to think about as well. One of the big benefits of assembling kind of this really, really cool group of industry protagonists in 4 different focus groups is they reminded us that, you know, that although our data speak to the pricing side and therefore the revenue side of the equation, and we can look at things like, oh, there was actually maybe a modest kind of quality and quantity adjusted price increases, and that's good. But it was repeated that COVID also had very serious implications on production costs. And anybody who's been tracking this industry a little bit for a while said, you know, the relationship between the prices that we pay and costs of production, yeah, it starts off quite problematic. Thin or negative margins in the wake of a price crisis. And if you have small bumps, you know, in revenue up against maybe non-trivial bumps in production costs, it's not clear that these somewhat reassuring price numbers, right, aren't masking sort of, you know, real concerns kind of on the income side. So more work needs to be done kind of post this report moving forward to make sure that we sort of understand sort of the twin effects, right, of a pandemic on both prices, volumes, but also on production costs. It was also mentioned, one of the things that's kind of exciting about a move to specialty is it introduces a greater plurality of buyers. And so it sort of offsets some of that sort of concentrated buying power. But there was concerns expressed as we moved towards kind of more of the sort of the more ordinary, large, size purchases in the regular segment. Is that going to sort of reconcentrate purchasing power? And so this idea of working really, really hard to make sure that we have a more diverse cross section of buyers, is COVID going to hurt that? And if it does, what does that mean for the for negotiating positions of small producers? Not all negative. If you sort of track the movement of the sector kind of through the 12 months, you actually saw kind of a very interesting, and some might say positive, rebound at the end, as the out-of-home consumption cratered with closed coffee shops. There was kind of a belief that this vehicle towards pushing, the fancier coffees, that it was going to be significantly and permanently perturbed. But one of the things that everybody saw was sort of a rebound in that fourth quarter as people sort of realized, well, if I gotta brew my coffee at home, I want to get better coffees at home. So online sales and subscription sales across the board sort of expanded to go alongside the expanding grocery store sales. And so this sort of, if you look at some of the folks that are kind of pushing for this more sort of robust planning and selling strategies into both the regular and fancy segments, there's the prospect that with more online and subscription sales, that this actually might create opportunities, moving forward for the people that grow and sell specialty coffees. So want to make sure that sort of we understand that it's things to worry about, but also all kinds of all changes are not bad. I apologize if this was a bit of a dry run, through the numbers, but I wanted to make sure that if you haven't had a chance to look at the report yet, that that you have a bit of a sense for what was in there. I really hope that it induces you all to download and read and begin conversations, but also to share. And I want to close before I turn things back to Ed and to Vera and Louise. That this report took the data that we have been collecting over time with our data donors. So there's a permanent thank you to the now between 80 and 90 importers, exporters, roasters, cooperatives that actually participate in the transaction guide program. But it also provided a bit of a stimulus, and we're thankful to the Catholic Relief Services and their coffee work, Rainforest Alliance, and TechnoServe's MOCA project for providing both financial support but also intellectual guidance for the project, to making sure that we sort of stayed online. And well, I guess because Giselle is here, I should probably publicly thank a most excellent kind of small but mighty team of folks that works at the nexus of our transaction guide and grounds for empowerment work, for all the work to make sure that, like I said, we were actually producing numbers that meant something, but in the case of Giselle and her team, that we could also kind of produce it in both English and Spanish, and that's it's really important for us. And then finally, for anyone who kind of happens to see or talk to one of those amazing specialty coffee growers, we in my side of the world, we directly experienced the pandemic through all kinds of hits and shocks and worries on the consumption side. But through all this, I've still been drinking some pretty amazing coffees, and that's because of sort of the ongoing contributions of resilience. So I think the primary thank you to a report like this is to the women and men that actually produce the coffee, that produce the data. So I want to make sure that we get a big shout out for that. And with that, I'll stand ready if there's any sort of technical questions afterwards, but I'm kind of hoping that the conversation that comes about what these things mean and what we do with them is a lot more important. Technology of number production. So I'll turn things back over to Chad.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. So for the next couple of minutes, we will have a fairly informal conversation to just kind of go back and forth around some of these key observations and how they're seen, felt, and understood in different contexts. And for that, I am going to be joined by two very good friends who I'd like to introduce themselves. So Vera, can you start, please?
Hi, Chad. Hi, Peter. Thank you, Peter, for that presentation. Again, my name is Vera Espinola Rafael. I work for Azar Coffee as managing their strategic initiatives, based in Mexico City, by the way.
And Luis.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. Thank you, Chad, for the invitation. Hello, Vera. I am Luis Saldanha, Luis Rodriguez. I am a coffee farmer and exporter located in Brazil.
Thank you both for joining me. So Luis and Vera both participated in some of the focus group conversations that we had as we were analyzing the data. For us, it was super important to be able to check in with real life practitioners who were experiencing and seeing these things happen in the field to really make sure that we were interpreting the data correctly. And so Luis and Vera both, I think I recall you each having interesting things to say about the compositional shift that is reported in the COVID-19 report. And that composition shift is something that we also heard a lot about on the market side, where if you were a company that did a lot of wholesale and retail, your retail part of the business basically was shuttered at the beginning of the pandemic, while your grocery store business, let's say if you had one, really started to ramp up. And this is what I believe led primarily to the composition shift in the data. People were responding and therefore purchasing more of the category of coffee that they need for the grocery accounts rather than for retail outlets. But what's also associated with that composition shift, generally speaking, is a lower quality potentially and almost certainly a lower price that can go into the grocery store environment. And so I heard this talked about by roasters a lot. And I also heard it spoken of by producers. And so, Luis, I wonder if you have any comments or observations related to that kind of a shift in your sales, or how did it come out in your experience in the Brazil context?
Thanks, Chad. Totally agree with your points. What we saw here, and there is one thing we need to consider when we see the data, for example, the impacts on Brazilian contracts. We had a reduction, I think, around 15%. We need to understand that we have just a few data donors from Brazil, and these ones were more severely impacted with the COVID. So that represents this 15% decrease, because as you may know, Brazilian harvest last year was huge. And this shows exactly this. So these higher quality exporters were affected with this decreasing of sales, while more commercial exporters were benefited with this. So what we saw was exactly this, the decreasing of the quality levels and buyers looking for cheaper and lower quality coffees like high commercials or commercials. And in the same way, looking for certified coffees. Basically, these certifications may be for applying for this grocery, for the supermarket kind of product. So that's what we saw. We had this decreasing in specialties and increasing on people looking for cheaper and lower quality coffees, and also looking for a bigger demand on certifications, probably for this supermarket segment.
Great, thank you. And I'll just take a moment to acknowledge one comment in particular I saw in the chat related to why no panelists from Africa, and I take that comment and I own that we do need to have more geographical representation, not only in our panel ongoing, but in our data, and that is something that we are proactively trying to pursue so that we have more representation globally. So thank you for the comment. Vera, in your experience with Azhar, I mean, I know and understand the business to be pretty focused on, let's say, more higher end specialty than lower end specialty, more of the fancy segment than the regular segment. Did you also see and feel this kind of a shift in the composition? I can remember Tyler, your colleague, talking a little bit about this in one of the calls. And so just wanted to know what's been your experience? Oh, you might be muted.
Yeah, thank you. So what my colleagues and I saw from the roasters that we work with and the importers that we work with is that definitely there was at the beginning a scare for all. I believe multiple contracts were not canceled, were put on hold, because I think everybody was also really wanting to see where is this going. And I think the majority of us thought that this will have a duration of around 3 months or so, and then everything will fall into place miraculously. I think as time passed by, what you'd see is that these contracts were picked up again, and certain adjustments were made in terms not necessarily in volume, but perhaps in terms of quality. Maybe not for all, but definitely for a few, which also shows the need to have the coffee, but also adjusting their demand, then their offer towards consumers. I think when time passed by and then we realized that this was going for a longer period of time, the roasters in these consuming countries were also adjusting to the situation itself, meaning that some of them were even maybe opening again in the lesser capacity or under the new normal, as it was called. And that, of course, was a good side because it meant that certain things could continue on, which means that aiming for that fancier coffee that they were looking for, because that's what they really wanted to offer. And so in that sense, yes, we noticed, I think, both angles in terms of a bit of volume, a bit of quality as well. But I think that has been adjusting towards the end of the year, where we had, of course, much more news on what kind of vaccination programs was going to be rolling out in the countries itself. And I think that has definitely pushed for that positive note to continue again where they were left off, or slowly picking that up again.
Great, thank you for that. Speaking about things sort of changing with the news of vaccine rollouts and things like that, so there has been some momentum and movement toward things opening back up and a return to some new normal. But given the reality that what we're seeing now is still sort of a trend and a tendency toward rolling lockdowns in different important key consuming countries, I'm wondering what do you guys have any feeling or are you sensing an impact from that now? And I guess, Luis, I'm talking to you because you're in the part of the year where you typically would be hearing from a lot of folks about what they're going to want to take from the crop that's going to shortly come off the trees. Is there like an increased or a continued sense of uncertainty, or have people sort of settled into a new normal plan, if you will?
Unfortunately, not yet. We have, again, different situations. For example, the bubble from Australia and New Zealand, they managed really effective. We see Asia going a little better than last year. Europe is still a question mark. We still some risks of lockdown. So we still have some clients that were severely affected. And they keep managing the stocks from past crops, so still have delays on shipments, and so it's a quality problem, it's a cash flow problem for both sides. While you see North America had a first good wave with vaccination going on, so looks like the demand improved for our coffees in the beginning of the year. So basically January and February was good, and now a little colder the situation. But in the other hand, what we have is now, last year we were discussing a lot on the demand side, on the economical problem and coffee shop being closed, but this year we can also have an offer problem. So Brazilian much smaller crop. The Brazilian situation with vaccination is going to take long because it's a huge population. Even vaccinating a lot, it's a huge population. It's going to take time. So it's a smaller crop, and we are struggling a lot with the pandemic. So it's really insecure to predict the future and how things are going on. So this is going to have a tremendous impact. So the uncertainty, not only on locking down from the demand side, but also we need to think about origin, because unless developed country get the vaccination, I'm not sure that underdeveloped countries are going to receive and being as successful where the developed country is being right now.
Okay, thanks for that. Vera, how about you guys? When you look forward, I guess I don't really even know how the situation is on the ground in Colombia, which is your primary country of operation. When you guys look at what might be coming forward in this year, I know your markets are pretty diversified, and so you're just like Luis, kind of thinking about the impacts in these different destination markets. How are you guys thinking about what might come to pass? Are some of your key clients still struggling and not really able to say exactly what they might need and when they might need it? So are you still in this like questioning what's going to happen during this next harvest phase, or how is it?
Yeah, definitely. I think as Luis pointed out correctly, it really depends on what kind of markets you're talking about, where indeed we see that Asia has been a bit much more open and looking for versus the other countries, for example, in Europe in itself, where we see that hesitation or not, at least in terms of volume, it's not that what we have expected. There's, interestingly enough, some of the new clients, but small ones, that are able to manage through particular subscriptions they're offering to their clients itself, either directly to consumers, which has been, a trend that you could see in several countries. And I do want to mention that where we definitely see a worry, and I definitely agree with that with Luis, is the next worry would be definitely when it comes, okay, so how are we going to manage the situation on the ground? How are we, for example, Colombia, specifically Bogota, is entering in again in a new lockdown this weekend, and several regions in the country are also restricted again. So that is definitely a bottleneck in terms of operations, in terms of moving your people around. It's not, of course, a reality in all of the countries, in all of the producing countries, but definitely in Colombia it will be of a potential bottleneck, as certain areas are going into their first piece of the harvest.
Great, thank you. Peter, I think you wanted to address a comment. Was it in the chat?
Yeah. Emilio, talked about, could we comment a little bit about, how some of the effects of COVID-19 might persist? And I think it's a good transition. We've been talking a little bit about, what happens as COVID-19 persists. But I was thinking a little bit, and this is, where, we're extrapolating beyond the data. But if we do see, for example, kind of a movement to grocery stores, how long does that take place before it kind of sticks? And before you have to kind of think about doing things differently because people are going to be buying more coffee through grocery stores and supermarkets. On the flip side is, as this online and subscription sales, if that becomes a more viable channel, then, producers have to sort of think about, how do we kind of make ourselves and our stories available to some of the roasters so they can kind of meet the customers in this new place. And the final thing that I'm kind of most worried about is we talk about the sales that go through coffee shops, and I'd love to hear the panel talk a little bit about what about all the learning and evolution that comes from coffee shops. In my experience, that's where this big part of the market kind of goes to be sort of told and educated and excited about kind of new and better coffees. So I'm just wondering if in addition to these thoughts about COVID-19 persisting, do you worry about some of these kind of sales channel developments that if they persist, that we have to change the way we do business?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing to consider. So I guess Vera and Luis, have you heard from clients about this like perhaps an anticipated shift that maybe they're anxious about? Like are they losing their ability to have meaningful conversations with consumers in person in shops where they might be able to elevate them to buying a fancier coffee, a more meaningful, impactful coffee that's going to more positively impact the life of the producer? How do you guys think about that? Have you heard from people who are struggling with this in the retail environment, and then think about how it affects you on the producing side?
I mean, I think it is interesting to answer that question, since I haven't been out of Mexico since over a year, and which is great, by the way. But I can only relate from what I see on social media, and what I hear about on these virtual talks, or people that I talk to. And of course, you see a lot of recent articles popping up about this consumer becoming, or more consumers becoming much more in a rapid pace, a pro-consumer, a consumer that is learning about how to brew coffee, is learning on how that piece. I would say that is taking off much more faster. I think in some way I can imagine that will be a struggle for a cafe, for the roasters itself. There is a piece of expertise and knowledge built into that part of what you're offering, which is of a value added. Simply thinking, oh, I can just do it now by myself. I see it's a craft. That's how I see the baristas, the shops. The roasting is a craft. Just as, for example, sommelier, although we do not recognize that added value to a barista in our current setting. I would love to see that value continues to be created much more for a barista, that expertise much more valued as a barista. But at the same time, also welcome these pro-consumer wanting to learn much more about what they're drinking and where it's coming from, and understanding. And that will only mean that how you message that, or how you convey your message, would most likely be done differently. And that will be just another challenge that we need to face with.
And so since there is this reported, at least in our focus group, sort of a tendency toward mail order, where there could be more of an opportunity to feature, highlight, and promote these kinds of fancier coffees that have a similar impact that you would generally want to upsell someone to in person. Is that something to be hopeful about? I mean, I can remember Tyler, Vera, during one of the focus groups, feeling pretty hopeful about that it was sort of leading to a re-upping of, or a recommencing of, let's say, those kinds of volumes for special and fancy coffees. As soon as people found that they could sell them online in a significant way, they got sort of reinterested in them again. Does that seem like it'll be sustained even as retail stores start to open? We've kind of introduced a new and fancier segment to online. Does that seem reasonable?
I mean, I'm not sure how much it can grow, in a sense. I think at the end of the day, even I prefer and sometimes love to just sit in a cafe. That experience, it's difficult to recreate in your home environment. You can do that as much as possible, but there is something that environment brings and gives you. I'm not sure on how much that can grow. I can definitely see it as an opportunity, specifically for that fancier coffee, because you would like to invest your money into that versus just buying regular coffee, because then why would you? I can definitely see that would be a very interesting piece to continue to develop. And at the same time, I'm not sure how, I think nobody really knows yet on how in these traditional consuming countries, companies, and how the back to normal will look like. I can only say from my experience here in Mexico, where we are living a different type of normal, where things are open again, and cafes are open. It is a combination of people getting, yes, back to work, but not full-time yet, just a couple of days in the office and sometimes not at all, towards people that are going into the office every single day. So continuing their habits as they were before. Yeah, I think it will be very interesting to see what will happen in the upcoming, let's say, year.
Great.
Not sure how Brazil has a completely different situation, of course, as well. The moment.
Yeah, how do you think about it, Brazil, or Luis in Brazil? Because I know that you guys focus on at Capricornio a lot of really beautiful, high-end, fancy coffees. Are you finding that still some clients are picking those coffees up? I mean, I'm assuming that that's the case in Australia and New Zealand, probably. But in other parts of the world, are you seeing that kind of business segment pick back up, or how is it?
I see as a cultural trend. I think pandemic is changing a lot of habits and giving us some kind of opportunities. But in fact, we still don't have a lot of coffee idols. What we see on movies, on TV is like you grab a coffee and go. If you have more this brewing your own coffee, making this a cool, nice habit, I think would help a lot. What we are seeing in Brazil, it's a beautiful specialty coffee wave. We are creating this sense of community. So farmers, as we are close, farmers, now we have much better roasters, much better baristas, and the public, the youth is seeing this as a beautiful ritual. It's cool brewing your coffee, discovering the flavor, discovering the region. So Brazil is passing through a beautiful popping new business, cool guys, seminars, and the dissemination of information. What I see in the other parts of the world, of course, again, it's cultural. So the impact was totally different. I see high-end in coffee shops and baristas having a nice success, sharing their recipes on social medias, and they have this strong community feeling because the people that buys from these super fancy coffee shops, they buy from them. Mm-hmm. So they had a lot. Of course, they had a big impact because the average ticket will decrease just purchasing coffee. Of course, you add more value on the coffee, but you are decreasing the other grocery things that you would sell. But I think these really nice success cases with these high-end in coffee shops providing recipes, sharing information, connecting through social media, and creating this community feeling. On the other, people that were in the middle, that was not this super high-end, these ones suffered a lot of position themselves in the market. And of course, you need to consider there is an economical issue. So people not being able to work and having less money to spend. So this movement going to supermarkets with lower quality coffees, it is something real. So I think these two words, they will grow no matter with more home office. I think you have more this habit of consuming this coffee clubs, this kind of stuff. But also you need to consider the economical impact that is tremendous, that we're going to suffer a couple of years.
Super. I'll just ask one more question of you guys, and then I think we'll open it up. And I don't know, Giselle, if there's anything in the chat that we have to address, but we'll do that at that time. I do want to take a moment and say, while it came up in our focus group conversations, we don't have data about how COVID-19 safety protocols and different requirements that resulted from the pandemic, how they impacted the cost to produce. I know you both have relationships with and contact with a significant number of producers, and Vera, you do surveying regularly on what those costs to produce are. What are you hearing about the impacts that people are enduring, because the pandemic is still going on and will still be going on for, you know, the foreseeable future, especially in some of these countries?
Yeah, I think so what we do at Azar, we compile cost of production data on a yearly basis for our Sustainable Coffee Buyer's Guide. When the first time that we started collecting the information was the data on 2018. and then 2019, and then as COVID hit in 2020, we wanted again to continue that surveying, which was a bit difficult at the beginning, so we did it a bit later in the year. And what we see from the conversations with them is definitely that for the first months, they were influenced by the exchange rate, which went up tremendously, and that impacted a lot of the countries. I would say that persisted for 3 to 4 months, even if it was not more, before adjusting slightly and being a bit more in the rational piece. And you can see definitely that the cost for inputs was higher because of the price per product was substantially higher. And I would say that some of them did have challenges getting workers and recolectores in, which meant that at the end of the day, you would see an efficiency impact in that as well, be it on a quality perspective or be it from a volume, simply not having enough workers in order to collect all of your coffee. So that was where their impact of cost of production was, but we should not forget that the majority of the production comes from smallholder families. What does that mean? That any impact on their household has also an influence on their cost of production. So, for example, the majority of them had to, buy subscriptions for internet in order for their kids to go to, virtual schoolings and buy a better package, which has enormous influence, of course, when you have then left to spend on your production. That I could definitely see from the talks that we had with producers was some of the things that popped up. Having to now have a different spending habit, I would say, spending on different things that you normally didn't do has a tremendous influence on these smaller families, hence also on how they spend on their cost of production piece. And for now, what we have been seeing, yes, there has been an increase, but at the same time, it then levels out a bit. If you don't have that much workers to pay for, it levels out that bit of piece. So I can see it per inputs, definitely. At the end, it's just a slight increase, a normal increase, which correlates with the inflation rate.
Okay. Luis, what are you seeing and experiencing when you're interacting, and you're a producer yourself, but with other producers who Capricornio works with? What's the impact on cost of production?
Yeah, Brazilian model applying a lot of technology and a lot of inputs. It's been dramatic affected. First, as Peter showed, that our currency had a 25% devaluation. So, and because of the commodities cycle, so prices are pretty high. So basically, all agrochemicals, all inputs are going high and higher. And as coffee as a commodity, the prices are going to be volatile, but these end products like fertilizers and agrochemicals, they're not going down probably. So we are having a tremendous impact. Also oil is extremely expensive right now. We have this problem of currency and also oil quotations. And these will also impact fertilizers because the nitrogen, the main source of nitrogen, it's almost directly correlated with oil prices, and all transportation, everything on freight. So the expectation is that prices right now, they are at least costs of production between 20 to 35% improving just because of the difference on the inputs. And also the difficulties on labor. So we are now 1 or 2 months to start harvest, and it's dramatic, stressful because we don't know what's going to happen. It's really stressful. We really don't know. We are probably in the worst period of the pandemic, and it's a huge uncertain of what's going on. Maybe we can be put under lockdown, and we really don't know. It's really complicated.
Great. Well, I thank you both, Vera and Luis, for your insights and for sharing your experiences and perspectives with us. Obviously, this work is only as good as the amount of perspectives that we include. Point still well taken on African perspective. Peter, did you want to address the Rainforest Alliance question to close us out?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And before I do that, Louise, that last point really resonates with me, sort of to pick up sort of the issues of not just economics and uncertainty, but also things like stress. And so underneath, the tip of the iceberg that we expose, through some of the prices, there's just a whole full iceberg's worth of, it's just got to be a more kind of like positive, pleasant, nurturing, resilient environment for the people that grow specialty coffee. And so I appreciate that piece that, we're going to try to kind of encourage folks to sort of think about the economics of the market and how you support and perturb, the economics of the market. And so I want to make sure that's resonating. Emilio had a second question that sort of relates to Rainforest Alliance and the benefits that come with it, and sort of alludes to like what would be the reaction. And the one thing I want to say with absolute certainty is I do not want to speak for our colleagues, be it the certifying bodies, the industry association, the NGOs, the cooperatives, the producers. There's just an awful lot of folks that have to sort of think about how we're going to support kind of the economics, the uncertainty, the stress associated with, producing and moving specialty coffee through a pandemic. We also want to make sure that, it's not like we're looking for like a particularly awesome pre-COVID context. We were still dealing with a price crisis for the people that grow specialty coffees. What we want work like this and is to contribute to the thought process. And we're very, very pleased to have partners like Rainforest Alliance. This is part of a collective thought process that says, as we think about kind of how we keep doing the good work, but make sure the good work gets better, they're very much committed to, to this kind of work and to looking at what the data are telling us, so we can get better. And it's our hope that as we keep developing out the transaction guide movement, growing the number of data donors from 80 to more than 100, being more regular with our guides and with our data briefs, that we can basically provide a context where we can have sort of open conversations that are based on collectively shared, data and insights. So do keep circulating some of the observations, keep data-based kind of observations live. And I'm really, really excited about, gathering the team together kind of next week and talk with our colleagues who are more comfortable interacting in Spanish. And I think to Chad's point, we have a number of very important and in the short term frustrating missives from our colleagues, in Africa, for example, to say, boy, wouldn't it be great if our work could speak with more fidelity to some of the issues that are going on in the African continent. And we say absolutely. And so keep putting pressure on us to kind of make sure that we do the best that we can to make this more relevant for more folks. And with that said, just want a quick thank you, to Chad and Giselle, as kind of ongoing colleagues, working with you all on I think kind of fighting the good fight during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then to the Louise and Vera and the focus group members and the data donors that you represent. It's a pretty awesome team, and so here's hoping that we can contribute to more better programming that leads to more better outcomes for the folks that grow specialty coffee, because that's what it's about. And with that said, I think we'll all just give a collective wave to all of you and say, please keep chatting with us, keep sharing, and we'll see you around.